Rama is the king of all kings, Parameshvara. Because he is God, therefore we are observing the anniversary of his appearance today. He is not the original form of God. The original form of God is Krishna, and Krishna expands himself in various other forms. The Srimad Bhagavatam says that nobody can count how many incarnations there are, but some of the chief incarnations are mentioned, and Lord Ramchandra is one of them. By his divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, speaking on the appearance day of Lord Rama, Hawaii, March 27, 1969. Prologue. Once upon a time, 2 million years ago, a great demon took birth. His name was Ravana, which means one who causes great sorrow to others. Ravana became a terrifying king. He had 10 heads and 20 powerful arms. His dark body shone brightly as he drove through the sky in his chariot. His reddish eyes darted about, searching the lands below. He was surrounded in the air by thousands of Rakshasas, clutching swords, barbed spears, and spiked maces smeared with blood. Some Rakshasas had the heads of tigers or donkeys. Others had fearsome faces with long pointed ears and rows of sharp fangs. Flying overhead, they could see the smoke rising from the sacrificial fires that were tended by sages living in the forests. Using their powers of sorcery, the horrible Rakshasas dropped volumes of blood, feces, and urine, defiling the Vedic sacrifices. They would then hurl huge boulders and blazing coals, crushing and burning the sages where they sat in meditation. Finally, Ravana and his demon friends would descend from the sky, howling and roaring as they tore people apart, drinking their blood and devouring their flesh. The demigods were powerless to protect people. Even though they tried, they could not defeat the king of the Rakshasas. They approached Lord Vishnu and begged, "Please save us all from this demon Ravana." Lord Vishnu assured the demigods, "Have no fear. I will descend as Rama and kill Ravana and his entire race. I will then rule on earth for 11,000 years to re-establish peace and prosperity. I want you to take birth as monkeys and be my army." Being so ordered, the demigods took birth as a race of giant monkeys. 10 million of them gathered around their 2 leaders, Vali and Sugriva, ready to serve Lord Rama. Chapter 1. The Appearance of Lord Rama. The birth of Lord Rama. In the prosperous kingdom of Koshala was the fabulous city of Ayodhya. Here resided the great hero and ruler Maharaj Dasarath of the Ikshvaku dynasty. He lived peacefully with his 3 beautiful queens, Kausalya, Sumitra, and Kaikeyi. The streets of Ayodhya were always filled with travellers, including kings and princes from all parts of the world who came to pay their respects to Emperor Maharaj Dasarath. All the surrounding towns and villages of Koshala were filled with abundant food, and the citizens of this kingdom were content. However, despite all this, Maharaj Dasarath was unhappy because he had no son to carry on his dynasty. Finally, he decided to perform a great sacrifice to attain such a son. For 3 days, specific mantras were chanted by highly qualified Brahmins and sacred fires burned. At the end of the great ceremony, a huge figure dressed in red robes stepped out of the fire, carrying a golden bowl with a silver lid. He said, "I am a messenger from Vishnu. In this bowl is magical food. When Maharaj Dasarath feeds it to his queens, they will bear him 4 sons." So saying, the wonderful figure gave the bowl to the emperor and disappeared back into the fire. Dasarath divided the contents of the bowl between his 3 wives. In due course of time, all 3 queens became pregnant, and their beauty increased day by day, as if they carried the sun and the stars. In the spring of the following year, on the 9th day of the new moon, the glorious time arrived for the birth of Lord Rama to the happy Queen Kausalya. On the following day, Bharat was born to Kaikeyi, and Queen Sumitra gave birth to twin boys, Lakshmana and Satrugna. The people of Ayodhya danced and sang in the streets, and Maharaj Dasarath opened his treasure house and gave gifts to all the Brahmins. Showers of flowers fell from the skies as everyone rejoiced. Boyhood of Lord Rama. With the passing of the years, the boys excelled in their studies, particularly in the science of archery, and they grew tall, strong, and virtuous. When they were 16 years old, a sage named Visramrita arrived at Maharaj Dasarath's court. His ashram in the forest was being attacked by 2 powerful demons who had been sent by Ravana. Visramrita begged the emperor for his son Rama to give them protection. In return, Visramrita promised to teach the secrets of many powerful weapons. Rama and his faithful brother Lakshmana left with the sage, and they walked for many days through tangled forests until they reached Siddha Ashram. That night, 2 dark and terrible shapes swooped out of the sky, raining blood and lumps of flesh in all directions. Rama discharged a wind weapon that threw one of the demons hundreds of miles across the ocean. With a fire weapon, he pierced the heart of the second demon, killing him instantly. The 2 princes were hailed as heroes by the sages. Rama marries Sita. In a kingdom several days' journey to the north of Siddha Ashram lay the city of Mithila, where the pious King Janaka of the Vidha dynasty ruled. He was holding a great 12-day festival, and news was sent throughout the lands. Vishwamrita decided to attend and soon set off with Rama and Lakshmana for Mithila. When they arrived at the outskirts of the city, they made camp, and news of their presence was carried to the king. Vishwamrita told his 2 students, "King Janaka has a bow which neither man nor demigod can lift. He keeps it in his court and has promised his daughter's hand in marriage to the one who can string the bow. Come with me now to the king's court." When they arrived, Vishwamrita introduced the 2 princes to King Janaka, who was astonished by their beauty and strength. The king said to Rama, "If you can string this bow, I promise you the hand in marriage to my daughter Sita." King Janaka ordered the bow brought out and placed in the middle of the festival arena. It was kept in an iron chest mounted on 8 wheels. 300 strong men were needed to drag it. A huge crowd assembled to eagerly watch. When the chest was opened, Rama stepped forward and grasped it firmly, saying, "This venerable bow that once belonged to Lord Shiva is now in my hand. I will lift it to see how heavy it is." Without any effort, Rama picked up the bow with one hand and tossed it into the palm of his other hand. Before the astonished audience, he expertly strung the bow and bent it back into a great arc until suddenly, with an explosive sound, it broke, sending out powerful shock waves which knocked many of the onlookers to the ground. King Janaka stood up from his throne and called out, "Rama has shown himself to be of inconceivable strength. My daughter, who is dearer to me than life itself, I now give to Rama." Sita, dazzlingly beautiful and decorated with priceless jewels, was escorted by her father to take her seat beside Rama. Rama took Sita's hand as celestial drums sounded in the sky and flower petals showered down. King Janaka also had a second daughter named Urmila, and his younger brother had 2 highly qualified daughters named Mandavi and Shrutakriti. They were given in marriage to Rama's 3 brothers. Thus, the 2 royal dynasties of Ikshvaku and Vidya were united in these grand alliances. Soon afterwards, all the princesses happily went to live in Ayodhya with their husbands. Chapter 2. The Exile. Crooked Advice. Manthara went before Queen Kaikeyi and said, "How can you be so calm when you are about to be utterly ruined? I am saying this for your benefit. Don't allow Rama to be crowned king. Your son Bharat should be the next ruler." Manthara then spoke her evil plan to the bewildered queen. "Maharaj Dasarath owes you a great debt when you helped him some time ago. Go to him and collect on his promise to you." Despite her love for her husband and her attachment for Rama, Kaikeyi became convinced by Manthara's crooked words. She fell to the ground crying when the king entered the room. Maharaj Dasarath was disturbed when he saw his wife and pleaded with her, "My dear queen, please tell me what is wrong." "There is something I must have," she sobbed. "Give me your word I can have it. Remember, you owe me a debt." The king answered, "I promise you shall have whatever you want." Her voice hardened. "My first request is for Bharat to be installed on the throne tomorrow. My second request is for Rama to be exiled to the forest for 14 years. Maharaj Dasarath pleaded with his wife, but she was unmoved. "Oh, your words are so cruel. Without Rama, I will die." But the king knew he was defeated. He would have to honour his debt and promise and banish Rama to the forest. The exile. The palace was covered by a veil of silent grief. The following morning, Rama and Lakshmana came to see their father. Maharaj Dasarath could only sit on his throne, repeating the name Rama, his eyes blinded with tears. Rama was then told of the events the previous night. Immediately he said, "If my father the king has made this promise, then I shall go to the forest this very day." He bowed before his father and left the palace. The devoted Lakshmana followed and said, "My dear brother, I will come with you." When the two brothers told Sita of their plans, she instantly replied, "My dear lord, we are bound together forever. Either I live in the forest with you, or I will die without you." While her maidservants cried in despair, Sita took off all her valuable jewels and beautiful sari and dressed in simple forest clothing, ready to follow her lord. News quickly spread throughout Ayodhya, and all the people assembled outside the palace. Amongst themselves they said, "We will follow Rama. We will turn the forest into Ayodhya and let this city revert to forest. We cannot be happy without Rama." When Maharaj Dasarath came out of the palace, Rama did not want to prolong his father's pain, and so they quickly stepped up onto a chariot and rode away. Dasarath stood watching the chariot diminish into the distance until only dust from its wheels could be seen. Even long after the dust had settled, Dasarath stood unmoving, his face wet with tears, hoping the chariot would turn around and bring his beloved son back to Ayodhya. The citizens of Ayodhya, however, began following the chariot. After many hours, and as night fell, Rama stopped to rest. The citizens came straggling into the camp, and soon everywhere people lay sleeping on the ground. In the early hours of the morning, while everyone slept deeply, still exhausted, Rama and Lakshmana and Sita quietly left. With one last look back at the citizens, they swiftly travelled away into the forest. When the citizens awoke, they found their dear Rama had gone. In great despair, they turned and walked back to Ayodhya. Arriving at the mighty Ganges river, Rama and his two companions found a boatman who rowed them across. All that day they walked through the forest until they came to the Jamuna river, where Lakshmana built a raft of logs to carry them across her waters. That night they slept under a banyan tree, and the next day they walked amongst the great trees that few men had ever seen. Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita were now deep in the forest. Back in Ayodhya, Maharaj Dasarath fell into a restless sleep. In the middle of the night he awoke and called out, "I am dying without my beloved Rama. Fortunate are those who will see his sweet face when he returns in 14 years." With those words on his lips, the emperor left this world. The kidnapping of Sita. Rama and his companions found a suitable place beside a stream where Lakshmana built a bamboo cottage, and here they lived peacefully. But one morning, a strange, misshapen creature, half woman, half monster, approached the cottage. When she saw Rama, she wanted him for her husband. She said, "My name is Supranak, sister of King Ravana. I live in this forest with my brother Kara. I want to marry you. Let me eat your feeble companions so that we can be alone." Rama laughed and said, "Lakshmana would make a better husband for you." Supranak turned to Lakshmana, who said, "Oh no, my dear, Rama would be better." Her simple brain confused, Supranak thought that Sita was the problem. She immediately rushed towards Sita, intent on killing her. Lakshmana quickly seized the creature and cut off her ears and nose. Splattered in blood, the demoness fled into the jungle, straight back to her brother Kara. In fury, Kara gathered a great army of 14,000 Rakshasas. Riding through the jungle with his army, bristling with clubs, spears, javelins, swords, and axes, they approached the cottage. Rama ordered Lakshmana to take Sita to a safe place. Standing alone, tightly holding his bow, Rama shone like a white-hot flame. Kara's troops surrounded Rama and rained down thousands of weapons of all kinds. But Rama poured arrows from his bow, and soon the ground was covered with the broken and dead bodies of the entire demon army. Supranak fled the forest and went to the island of Lanka, where her brother Ravana ruled. Standing before him with her scarred face, she bitterly told her story. The 10-headed Ravana, his 20 arms and broad chest covered with battle scars, sat on his golden throne and listened with increasing anger. However, when his sister described the beautiful Sita, Ravana resolved to kidnap her. Ravana's court minister, named Maricha, was a magician who could change his shape at will. Ravana ordered Maricha to go to the cottage disguised as a golden deer. "Show yourself to Sita, who will surely ask Rama to catch you. This will give me the opportunity to steal Sita away." Soon after, Sita was collecting flowers in the forest when she saw a most extraordinary deer whose body shone like a rainbow. Sita called out, "Rama, please, can I keep that deer for my pet? Please capture it." Rama instructed Lakshmana to stay with Sita. The deer lured Rama into the forest. Calling out in a magical voice that sounded just like Rama, the deer said, "Lakshmana, come and help me now." Sita heard what she thought was Rama's cry for help and sent a reluctant Lakshmana into the forest. Sita was now alone. Ravana appeared at the cottage disguised as a sage, but even so, Sita was wary of him. Ravana changed back into his huge 10-headed form, and picking up the crying Sita, he stole her away in his chariot that was driven in the air by flying donkeys. Sita had been kidnapped by the merciless Ravana. The search. When Maricha's trickery was revealed, Rama and Lakshmana raced back to the cottage, but all was empty and silent. Running here and there, Rama looked everywhere and called out to all the trees and animals, "Have you seen my dear Sita?" Lakshmana tried to pacify Rama, saying, "Take heart, my lord, we will find Sita. We will search the forest and mountains, the oceans and rivers." Setting out immediately with bow in hand, Rama and his brother headed west. After some days, they reached the edge of the lotus-filled Lake Pampa and rested there. Sugriva, lord of the monkey tribes, came to that lake to gather fruits and saw those two mighty princes. Sugriva sent his wise and fearless commander, Hanuman, to see who they were. Hanuman, discovering them to be Rama and Lakshmana, said, "Please come with me, I will take you to Sugriva." Hanuman lifted the brothers on his massive shoulders and carried them through the forest to Sugriva's camp. There, Rama met the Monkey King and asked for his help in finding Sita. In the meantime, the monsoon season had arrived, and so Rama and Lakshmana lived in a nearby cave while the rains lashed the lands. After 4 months, the skies cleared and Rama reminded Sugriva of his promise to help find Sita. Sugriva gathered millions of monkeys and divided them into 4 groups, each assigned with a different direction to search. Hanuman commanded one of these groups and was given the southern lands to explore. Just before Hanuman left, Rama came to him and said, "Take this ring inscribed with my name, and if you find Sita, give it to her. She will know you to be my servant. I am depending on you." Hanuman took the ring, bowed at Lord Rama's feet, and then set off on his mission. Over the following days, Hanuman's party of monkeys crossed over a huge range of mountains and then walked through a desert where they had no food or water, but still they travelled onwards. Just when all hope seemed to be fading, they came upon a vulture named Sampati, who was eager to help them. He said, "I once saw a beautiful young woman being carried through the air by Ravana, who lives in the city of Lanka on an island far out to sea. You will find Sita captive there." On hearing this news, Hanuman went to the seashore and, using his mystical powers, flew through the air across the ocean and landed on the island of Lanka. He made his body small, and leaping from tree to tree, he searched for Sita. In a grove near Ravana's palace, Hanuman found Sita sitting under a tree, her face wet with tears. She was surrounded by fierce female Rakshasa guards who were sleeping on the ground. Hanuman climbed into the tree above the gentle Sita and dropped Rama's ring down onto her lap. Hanuman whispered, "Have no fear, my lady. Rama will soon be here." Sita smiled with great happiness. Her lord was coming to rescue her. Chapter 3: War. Building a bridge to Lanka. When Hanuman returned to Sugriva and told him the whereabouts of Sita, Sugriva stretched and curled his tail in delight. Hanuman then went to Rama and Lakshmana with the news. He faithfully repeated to Rama every detail of his meeting with Sita. Rama replied, "I cannot repay you. I have nothing to give you other than this embrace." With these words, Rama clasped Hanuman to his chest. "Now that I know where Sita is, I do not want to delay a moment longer. Take me to her." They immediately set out for the shoreline across from the island of Lanka. Arriving there, Rama summoned a monkey named Nala to supervise the construction of a bridge. Hordes of monkeys went into the nearby forests and mountains and gathered trees and rocks for building materials. For 5 days they worked until the glorious bridge reached across the ocean to the shores of Lanka. Celestial beings gathered in the heavens to admire the amazing construction. Guards were posted at the Lanka end of the bridge so that enemy soldiers could not sabotage anything. Sugriva then came before Rama and announced that the bridge was completed and secure. Hanuman picked up Rama and carried him on his shoulders as they began walking on the bridge across the deep ocean. At the end of the day, as the sun was setting, Rama's great army had arrived on the beaches of Lanka. The next morning, Rama arranged the monkeys into a formation with himself and Lakshmana at its head. The vast army of millions of monkey soldiers spread across the horizon. They began surging across the beach towards the cliffs in unrelenting waves. The war begins. Rama's army arrived at the foot of Ravana's city walls, and with the sound of conch shells blowing, they began scaling the defences. Thousands of demons rushed out, eager to battle the monkeys. The fighting continued into the night, and Rama's arrows blazed in the dark like flaming tongues as he killed countless demons. Ravana sent his son Indrajit into the battle. Indrajit, a mighty warrior, made himself invisible and flew in the sky, raining down arrows. These arrows were poisonous snakes which bit deeply into their victims while binding them with coils of steel. Indrajit returned to his father, thinking the battle was almost won. Ravana entered the fight himself, leading an army of gigantic demons, but Rama attacked and drove him back. Disgraced by this, Ravana returned to his palace to contemplate his next deadly move. Ravana's giant brother. Ravana had a brother named Kumbhakarna. Long ago, when he was born, Kumbhakarna began eating all living beings at a frightening speed. To try to help everyone, Lord Rama arranged that Kumbhakarna would sleep for 6 months at a time and only be awake for 1 day in between. Ravana now sent his demon servants to awaken his brother. Kumbhakarna stomped into the battlefield, killing many monkeys under his feet. He greedily began thrusting monkeys into his mouth until he was covered in blood and gore. Kumbhakarna roared in a deafening voice, "I am ready to kill you, Rama." Laughing insanely, he flew at Rama with his horrific mouth open. Rama took aim with a golden arrow encrusted with diamonds and sent it blazing through the air. It instantly cut off the demon's head. Ravana's brother was dead. Rama defeats Ravana. At Ravana's command, the thousands of soldiers on chariots, elephants, and horses, as well as millions of foot soldiers, assembled, ready for combat. Ravana then stepped into the battlefield to confront his greatest enemy. Immediately, Rama created havoc by killing many of the Rakshasas. Then the two combatants, Rama and Ravana, circled each other, shooting terrifying missiles charged with mystic potencies. The sky darkened, and all the soldiers felt oppressed with fear. Ravana's arrows manifested heads of lions, vultures, snakes, and wolves as they flew towards Rama. In response, Rama sent forth arrows of fire, appearing like the sun, meteors, and comets. The time had come now for the final act of war. Rama mounted his chariot and set off in pursuit of Ravana, who had also mounted his chariot, which was covered with spikes and wreathed in fire and smoke. Rama countered this weapon with his own weapon, and the two forces collided with an explosion that lit up the skies. As Ravana flew into the sky above the battleground, Rama then fired a golden arrow that severed one of Ravana's 10 heads. But another head quickly replaced it. Again and again, Rama cut off Ravana's heads, but they all reappeared. Rama took out his Brahmastra arrow and shot it with the speed of sound towards Ravana. Spitting out flames and covered with smoke, the arrow penetrated the heart of the king of the demons. Ravana's body fell lifeless to the ground. Immediately the sky cleared and flowers rained down. Rama was surrounded by his faithful army, and the earth shook with their roaring shouts of congratulations, while the demigods in the sky chanted the glories of Rama with great satisfaction. Rama then spoke with Vibhishana, who was Ravana's only remaining brother. Vibhishana was not a demon, though. In fact, he was a devotee of Lord Rama and had helped fight against his brother. According to Rama's instructions, he returned to the city and made funeral arrangements for the fallen king. Ravana's body was shrouded in linen and carried in a procession to the beach, where Vibhishana lit the funeral pyre amid the sound of Vedic hymns. Rama then ordered Lakshmana to arrange the installation ceremony, whereby Vibhishana was crowned king of Lanka. The Rakshasas were joyful to see Ravana's brother as their king, and they brought him many gifts, which Vibhishana in turn offered to Rama. When the ceremony was complete, Rama asked Hanuman to go quickly and find Sita, saying, "Please inform the princess that I have defeated Ravana and I long to see her." Rama and Sita returned to Ayodhya. Hanuman found Sita sitting under a tree and looking very sad. Hanuman approached and said, "O fair lady, your husband has come out victorious. The demon Ravana is no more. Dear mother, your woes are ended." Sita was filled with joy. When Rama and Sita were reunited, Sita bloomed with happiness. She sat next to Rama on a golden throne. Demigods and sages appeared in the assembly, offering praises to Rama. The following day, the 14 years of banishment were completed, and Rama told Vibhishana that he was returning to Ayodhya. Vibhishana replied that the heavenly Pushpaka chariot was in Lanka. Ravana took this chariot, which moves according to one's will, from Kuvera, the treasurer of the heavenly planets. The chariot desires to render service to you, O Rama. Vibhishana bowed low and repeatedly begged Rama to stay a little longer in Lanka, but Rama wanted to depart. His exile was over, and he had promised everyone that he would return to Ayodhya immediately. Rama said, "You have served me well on the battlefield, and I am deeply indebted to you. But now you must grant me leave, O valiant Rakshasa." Vibhishana brought forth the golden chariot, and it appeared in the sky. It was sparkling with beautiful jewels and trellises covered with garlands of heavenly flowers. Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana climbed aboard the chariot. But as they were about to depart, Sugriva the Monkey King begged, "O Rama, please take us with you. We all desire to see you installed as the emperor." Rama smiled and invited all the monkeys to mount the celestial chariot, which was like a golden city. Vibhishana was also invited, and when everyone was on board, the Pushpaka rose high in the sky. It moved gracefully, just like a magnificent swan. When news came that Rama was coming back to Ayodhya, thousands of citizens came out to welcome their returning prince. Some walked, some rode on elephants or horseback, and some came in chariots. The sound of conch shells blowing and drums rolling was tumultuous. A great roar arose from the crowds when they saw in the distance the shining Pushpaka. The chariot gently descended to earth. Rama stepped out onto the ground along with Sita and Lakshmana. Bharata and Satrugna approached, and the four brothers embraced each other for a long time. Next, Rama saw his mother Kausalya nearby and quickly fell at her feet. Even though she was thin and pale from separation from her son, she was now filled with happiness. Next to her was Samita, who also appeared in a similar condition. Rama bowed before her as well and touched her feet in reverence. Rama also respectfully approached Kaikeyi. He then turned and smiled at all the citizens bringing joy to all their hearts. The crowds called out, "Victory to Rama! All glories to Sita and Rama!" The earth itself appeared to rejoice as her sweet-smelling flowers filled the air with perfume. The demigods crowded the sky and experienced great happiness upon seeing Rama's return to Ayodhya.